Our guest this morning is Robert Devine from the law firm Baker Donelson. Good morning, Robert, and thank you for being here today. I think today's episode is very timely given the recent happenings in the EB-5 world, both the Bering lawsuit in California federal court, as well as the expiration of the program that looks like to be imminent this week on the 30th of June. With that, maybe just give us a minute and kind of explain what the two recent happenings were in the last week.
Okay, well, the biggest picture item is that the law that relates to or makes possible regional centers and the indirect investment that they make possible under the law is a temporary law, and it expires on June 30th. And everybody hoped and expected that law to be renewed in the Senate, as it has been done about 25 times since it was first enacted in an appropriations bill, a funding bill in 1992. And last week on Friday, an effort to get that renewed in the Senate, part of the United States Congress, failed. And it's clear that it is not going to get renewed before June 30, so we are going to see an expiration of that law. We certainly hope that the law will be renewed soon, even in the next coming weeks, and definitely within the next few months. So it's important to understand what that regional center law does and doesn't do. Before that law was enacted, there was the EB-5 program, and it still exists, and it will continue even after this law expires. So that's what we frequently call the direct EB-5 program, and it involves the investor placing his or her capital into what we call a new commercial enterprise, a company, that uses that money to develop some project, a business, and the investor can claim credit for the 10 required jobs only from the direct full-time operational jobs of that business. It's a very limited program, and people need to really understand how limited that is. And it's not just that, excuse me. The regional center program, the regional center law, was an overlay on top of that added some options that don't exist in the direct program. The idea was to foster pooled investment in kind of specific areas that might really need development. And so Congress said, we're going to create this thing called regional centers. And I think the idea was that these centers could kind of foster the idea of using foreign investment in their development programs and maybe help just kind of get the idea going. And also to make sure that the people who might try to attract the investment would have an idea, have an understanding of what's required, and wouldn't go spinning up the world drawing in investors to something that didn't even qualify under the rules. So there has to be this regional center involved as what we call a sponsor. But they're not really they don't have to be the entity that's raising the money. That's the new commercial enterprise. And the new commercial enterprise then can raise the money, must be equity investment, and then that entity, under the regional center program, not normally, not under the direct program, but under the regional center program, that entity can turn around and make a business of putting that money into some other company that will use the money to do some economic activity, develop something, create jobs. And so that indirectness of the investment is part of what the regional center law makes possible. The other thing that law makes possible is that the investors get to claim credit not just for the operational direct jobs that are employed by the project after it gets completed. But that company, I mean, the investors can claim credit also for the indirect jobs that result from that. And these are kind of the trickle up and trickle down jobs that we think of when we think of economists estimating how many jobs a new factory in a city might add to the economy. Not just the people working in the factory, but the people who work in the restaurant down the street and the people who work in the steel factories that supply the construction and whatever. And so being able to count those jobs makes it easier to have enough jobs created to give credit to the EB-5 investors. And in the last 10 years or so, the Immigration Service even has acknowledged and given credit for the jobs that are the impact from construction expenditures. So just building something can create enough jobs to take care of the job creation requirement for the investors, even if the whole thing failed as a business, never even fully opened. There could be enough jobs there. Of course, the investors might lose all their money, but they might be able to keep their green card. So that's been a big part of the allure of the Regional Center program, that there's kind of immigration safety in these construction projects, even if they're not operationally successful. So that's what's possible by the Regional Center program. So when the Regional Center program expires on Wednesday, investments into that kind of thing that come in indirectly and that give credit for indirect jobs like construction and trickle up and down related to the operations, those can't happen anymore. Those can't be credited. Those can't count. That kind of investment cannot be the basis of a filing until that regional center law gets renewed. So that's what's going on with the expiration. That's the effect of the expiration of that law. There's also an effect on existing investors, which I haven't talked about. If you want me to go ahead, I will.
Yeah, Robert. So I think our listeners are going to want to go into detail and talk about what all that means. But just to rehash, the 1990 law, which came as part of the Comprehensive Immigration Reform and Immigration Act of 1990, that created the EB-5 program, and that program is permanent. The 1993 law, which was the Regional Center Pilot Program, is what sunsetted and is expiring on June 30th, unless Congress, when they come back in session, negotiate and renew that law. I know, obviously everyone in the EB-5 industry knows you. You're the kind of the godfather of EB-5. But I think what would be interesting is if you could just kind of take a step back and, for some of our audience that may be new to EB-5, explain your experience at your current law firm and then your experience when you worked at the USCIS. I think that would be helpful, and then we can jump into some of the questions.
Okay. So I started practicing immigration law in 1986, right as President Reagan signed the law that created amnesty for about 3.5 million people and required the I-9 form that every employer has to fill out every time they hire somebody to make sure they're legal and all that. And so that was a long time ago, 35 years ago. And I wrote a book on immigration law that I started writing in maybe 1991 or two, finished it 3 years later, and it's in its 15th edition. It's a treatise on all aspects of U.S. immigration law that is used by probably mainly lawyers, but all kinds of other people in the United States. And in 2004, I was appointed by President George W. Bush to be the Chief Counsel of USCIS, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which was the part of the new Department of Homeland Security and the component of the old Immigration and Naturalization Service that adjudicates immigration benefits. It's not the people who guard the border or who kick people out who we find illegally here. It's the people who decide who can come legally, become a citizen, and get certain visas. So I was the first person appointed to that role. And for a while, after a year or so, the director got sent off to be the ambassador to Spain after the train bombings. They needed a steady hand there, and he left me in charge as the acting director of USCIS for a while until the next person could get appointed and confirmed by the Senate. Went back to being chief counsel, and then returned to my practice at Baker Donelson in late 2006. Since then, well, I guess at that time, while I was in the government, we did some things that kind of helped revive the EB-5 program, which had really fallen into disuse. And so I was able to then, as I came back out of the government, be involved in kind of helping to steer the development of the program. I guess one of the main things I was able to do was to kind of negotiate and help structure or encourage the structuring of the process by which developers of projects can get approval of their projects as an exemplar so that they can confidently go out and raise money from foreign investors who know that this project can be approved and don't have to wonder if it's going to be approvable. So I've represented, I guess I've helped syndicate a few hundred EB-5 offerings for developers and regional centers and new commercial enterprises, and have also represented, I don't know, some many hundreds or thousand, I don't know, of EB-5 investors in their pursuit of immigration based on their investment. So I've been very involved, and I guess I'm also kind of known as a cleanup person. Whenever there's a big mess, somehow it seems like they end up in my direction, and I'm crazy enough to take them on a lot of times, I guess. And I kind of like lawyering the hard cases, and we've had a lot of challenge in trying to salvage some messed up situations, and really enjoy doing that. Mm-hmm. So, and finally, as my law firm, I lead the immigration group at Baker Donelson. It's a law firm that's mainly has a footprint in the southeastern United States. All over that, we have about more than 20 offices, and including Washington, D.C., where we have kind of a lobby shop. And that's the deal.
Well, great. Robert, it's wonderful to have you. I think it's helpful for our audience to get the insights, not just from someone that's been involved in EB-5 35 plus years, but someone that has been on the inside, on the USCIS side, because there's just not a lot of information out there, how the USCIS operates, how do they adjudicate, what they look at, what they think, and how that whole process kind of works. If you don't mind, maybe jumping in now to the legislative side, outside of the executive agency, what happened in the Senate last week where the program essentially is expiring?
Yeah, I think it's helpful to kind of see the forces involved in the EB-5 industry. I think most senators and congressmen have a generally favorable disposition toward EB-5. There's been a lot of positive economic impact all over the United States because of this program. There are a few senators and a few congressmen who have an attitude about selling green cards and may not be in favor of it. But on the whole, I think there's general positive sentiment, and it's not so much about whether the EB-5 Regional Center program is going to be extended, but under what conditions is that going to happen. And the recent effort was really championed by the Industry Association of Regional Centers called IIUSA. I guess that was Invest in the USA, made into an acronym. So you can go to www.iiusa.com and see
.org, I think, actually.
Or .org, thank you, yes, .org. And see, what they're promoting and all that. But I was the vice president, the elected vice president of IUSA for 7 years. And so I have a sense of, what that organization is and does. And it's a wonderful organization. It represents a wide range of regional centers who are, from all over the country, big money centers, small, rural, everything in between. And I would say that organization has just been focused on getting the program, getting the regional center legislation renewed, whatever it takes. And what it appeared to take was to satisfy two key senators who had clearly absolute requirements and the apparent ability to potentially block any legislation that didn't meet their demands. And their demands were basically no changes to the essential program of how much money is invested and where and all of that. It was really more about what they called integrity measures, which is a bunch of requirements on regional centers and new commercial enterprises and developers to make clear offerings about their projects and to handle the money properly, and to avoid some of the scandals that we've seen and heard of that are really unfortunate, where somebody got their hands on a whole bunch of people's money and misused it, ran off with it, whatever. And so these senators, including Senator Leahy from Vermont, who was super embarrassed by all the stuff that happened at the J-Peak project and the misappropriation and this commingling and mismanagement of money. And then Senator Grassley from Iowa, who I'd say probably has, as many strong feelings about scandal as anybody you could ever see. He's got a whole operation of his Senate staff that's focused on kind of exposing scandals in and associated with the government. And he was tired of hearing about those associated with the EB-5 program. So those two guys got together. They're actually good friends. One's a Republican, one's a Democrat. I can remember testifying in front of them several years ago, about 2011, I think it was. And they had an amazing relationship that was reflected in that hearing, where they've traveled together. Their families are friends, but they got together on this, and they feel strongly about it. And the industry had input with them about trying to make some tweaks to what I thought were kind of unreasonable demands about these integrity measures. Got it a little better, and that was the law that was proposed. On the other side of the political, or it's not exactly political, but industry-oriented balance of power, is a group of regional centers that are mainly based in big money centers, and particularly New York. But it's not only that, and I can't just completely characterize this group as just only big money center. But anyway, that's the EB-5. Is it Immigrant Coalition or Investor Coalition? I guess it's what does IC actually stand for? EB-5IC, and I forget what the I stands.
Investors Coalition, I believe.
Maybe so.
Investors Coalition.
And
yeah, I agree with that.
Those folks basically wanted to change the balance, change some key pieces of how the program works, and they wanted what we would call a grand bargain, a new balance of how much is invested and where the investment can be lower. And so this is about, we know that there was the $500,000 limit or low required amount and $1 million before. Then after new regulations were promulgated in 2019, it changed to $900,000 and $1.8 million, double again. And that's probably the biggest sticking point. The fact that if you can't meet the requirement of a targeted employment area that allows the lower level of investment, then you have to get people who are willing to invest twice that amount. And that those folks see as too prohibitive, that it's just too much more than the minimum investment. And it gives too much incentive for people to invest in the targeted employment areas, and not enough incentive to invest in other places. And they felt that's just out of balance. And that's the main thing. And so I don't know that they were as focused on trying to reduce the 900,000 back toward 500,000. I think they would be happy for that. But I think more important to them is what's the gap between 900,000 and the next level. And they were looking for something more like, they'd love it for it to be like 950,000 or a million or 1.2 million, not, 1.8 million. And then they wanted also to change the rules to open up what could be considered a targeted employment area. The 2019 regulations had narrowed what could be considered targeted employment area. Instead of being susceptible to a state designating some, snake-like area that could include, this location of the project here, and then go grab some areas of high unemployment over here and connect them to something that could have a combined weighted average of 150% of the national average of unemployment. The new regulations had changed that and narrowed them to where you could only have a census tract of where the project was, plus any combination of census tracts that directly touch that one census tract. So think of kind of a bullseye. And that's very narrow, and it wouldn't include, for instance, Midtown Manhattan and the center cities of many places where big development happens. So, but it would consider, all of the Bronx, as I understand it, to be high unemployment areas, but that wasn't enough. And so these folks wanted to do something to make that broader and or narrow the gap between the lower and the higher amount for EB5 investment. I think they also had hopes of trying to get more visa numbers available for this program, which everybody wants. Everybody wants that. But, that's just really not realistic. It hasn't been realistic in the political environment. And I don't believe it is realistic going forward anytime soon. So I think they would have let go of that. So it's really about, big city versus kind of rural and other on this issue. And basically what this came down to in the Senate was that one way or another, the parties that were wanting something, a rebalancing of the investment amounts and so forth, were able to get the bill stopped. It took a very limited procedure to try to get this bill to the floor because it wasn't able to be attached to some other must-pass legislation. So they were able to set up a voice vote, which they call a hotline process in the Senate, where if there's any senator who objects to it, then it will be killed. And in this particular instance, one senator from South Carolina objected. If it hadn't been him, it might have been somebody else. I don't think it's such a big deal exactly who it was. But it happened, and I think that basically reflected that these folks are serious enough about it that they're willing to take the risk that the program doesn't get extended to wait on a better deal than what they were about to get. I hope that they didn't mess up everybody by doing that, but I think they're committed to trying to get something renewed, and I really think they believe that we will still get a renewal, because otherwise a bunch of people who already invested are going to get screwed.
So, Robert, a lot of these negotiations, so you're saying the negotiations are going to hopefully continue past June 30th, and there'll hopefully be some kind of reauthorization, but we just don't know what that will entail yet.
That's right. I mean, I think what they've basically done through what happened Friday is they've shown they can and are willing to stop anything from happening if they don't get more of what they want. And so the other side, that would be kind of the IIUSA side. It's not just them, but that's Senators Grassley and Leahy. If they want to get it renewed, they're going to have to come back to the table and meet a little bit more in the middle. So, is it going to be 900,000 and 1.3 million, 1.2 million, 1.1 million? And what will those numbers be? It could be 750 and 850,000.
Okay. So it's possible that the 900 could also be reduced as well.
It's possible.
Okay.
I personally doubt that's going to happen, but it could.
Robert, it's very interesting. I've had people tell me last week when these negotiations were going on that this bill that Senator Grassley and Leahy, which is a bipartisan bill, had sponsored, that this was somehow a Republican bill and the Democrats would never pass that. But we all know, from EB5, from history, Senator Leahy has been one of the biggest champions of EB5. In fact, Ted Kennedy, I think, was one of the original champions of EB5. But this has been a bipartisan bill. It was co-sponsored by Senator Leahy and Grassley, and co-sponsored actually by Senator Coons, who's a good friend of President Biden and replaced President Biden as a senator from Delaware. And really, it's been kind of the old age-old battle between the small states versus the more populous states. And interestingly enough, Senator Graham, who's a Republican, is the one that blocked the bill. And as you mentioned, if he hadn't, Senator Schumer from New York would have probably blocked it. But it's interesting. If you could just talk about, is this a Republican bill? Is it a Democrat bill? Which I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there, and I believe it's completely bipartisan. There's different things in play, but I'd love to hear your point of view on it.
Well, immigration itself is not really a partisan thing in the United States in a way that some other issues are. Immigration, there are Republicans and Democrats who are more favorable about immigration than others in either of their party, and then there are some other. It's more, I would say, immigration is more driven along populist and other positions, and there are what I would call populists in both the Democrat and the Republican Party. And I think it's, the political sentiment against immigration has to do with economic fear. I think most people who are in favor of limiting immigration are driven by economic fear, a sense of protecting their own and their fellows' opportunities, and some, I would say probably also some cultural fear that whatever kind of culture we have in the United States is going to be eroded or diluted by the entry of a whole bunch of people we don't know about, and that kind of thing. And I think it's important not to denigrate people who have those feelings, but try to speak to, the realities. There are people who feel similarly about trade bills, about reducing tariffs and other limits on trade. They're just afraid that open trade is going to end up costing them jobs. And there's some reason, there's a basis for their concern. There are some sophisticated realities that these reducing trade restrictions actually increase job opportunities in the United States and everywhere. But it's complicated, and it's hard for people to get their minds around the realities. It's also very difficult to prove to somebody in either of those areas, trade, immigration, that if we do this, the costs and the benefits of that will be X. because it's too complicated to hold everything in a stasis, hold everything else, in place to see what changing one thing or another in these areas would cause. So you can find studies that kind of say, oh, increasing immigration will make things worse, and other studies show increasing immigration makes things better. EB-5 is a little different as an aspect of immigration. I mean, I think it's obviously easier to say that increasing and maintaining EB-5 immigration actually increases job opportunities in the United States. It's the very basis of the program, that you have to do something that creates U.S. jobs. So that gives it kind of a special allure and reduces the objections that many other types of immigration have. But look, there are people who just politically feel there should be no more immigration than there already is, and that it should be restricted, and that's just how they feel, and that's not going to change no matter what anybody says. So it is very difficult to get more numbers. I think trying to at least keep the numbers that EB-5 has, which they're still there. Nobody took away any EB-5 numbers when this regional center legislation will expire Wednesday. The numbers are still there. They just can't be used by people who are using these indirect arrangements for their investment.
One of the conversations that I've been having all week long with prospective investors is what's going to happen during this gray area after June 30th. Is USCIS still going to accept applications and perhaps hold them in abeyance, or are they going to stop accepting applications altogether? And even on top of that, what is the price that they're going to be accepting investments at? So do you have any insight or maybe just an opinion onto what could happen with that?
Okay, first, let's hold off on the price discussion, because to really get into that, we need to go into that litigation that we really haven't started the conversation about. But aside from that, after June 30th, as far as new filings for immigrants, the only filings that can be made for immigrant investors is for people who are investing in a company whose federal ID number is going to be on the paycheck of the 10 operational full-time jobs that that business will operationally create when it is completed. That's a very narrow thing. And, most of the projects that have been out there would not qualify under that arrangement. There may be some people who are going to try to tweak that and turn some projects or some spots into direct offerings. But that's the only thing that can be done as far as new investment until this regional center legislation gets renewed. Now, what happens about existing investors is really to be seen. I mean, technically, there is for anybody who invested based on a regional center, there is no law that allows them to proceed in their path toward immigration. And so there can be no approvals of anything after Wednesday. Now, we need to make clear the Immigration Service, I think, appropriately has, in previous situations where this has kind of come up very briefly, they have said that expiration of this regional center law does not mess up people who already got in here based on an EB-5 investment. So if you got a green card based on EB-5, even though it's conditional and you have to file your 829 to keep it, your I-829, that doesn't get affected. And that would be ridiculous to say that somebody who already actually immigrated has to then leave because the law that supported it is not approved. So we're not talking about that. But anybody who didn't actually get here and get the stamp in their passport on that visa or get approved for adjustment of status and get that green card, they're dead in the tracks for now until the law gets renewed. Now, the Immigration Service in the past has acknowledged we're not going to just deny everything that's sitting here and, waiting for us to adjudicate. We're not going to go revoking the things we already approved that people haven't been able to use yet to get in here. We're just going to hold all that stuff. And they call it hold it in abeyance and just sit on it and not do anything with it. And I think actually maybe if somebody has adjustment pending, they may still let them renew their work and travel documents, but not get approval of their green card. And I think the State Department, I've got a lot of clients who were about to have interviews in China, to get a visa. And I'm expecting that after Wednesday, anybody who had an interview after Wednesday, they're going to cancel their interview. They might, it's conceivable a consulate could go ahead and have an interview, but not issue the visa. I do not believe they're legally capable of issuing a visa to those people. So that's going to be the situation for a while. And there's no rule, there's nothing super clear about how long USCIS would tolerate and preserve kind of the status quo while giving Congress a chance to finish getting this done. But Senator Schumer said last week in the Senate, as all of this craziness was going down, he said he had checked with USCIS and they had said to him that they were not going to go denying and revoking, and they were going to hold things in abeyance, given the Congress time to do something. I think that's probably right, and nobody knows how long that will be. I would say if it gets past September 30th, then everybody's going to be getting more nervous. At some point, USCIS could pull the trigger and say, we can't keep these things in abeyance forever, and Congress is just going to have to act or not. But I think they even might take longer than September 30, and probably as long as it takes to get a budget bill passed for the whole federal government, which expires at present on September 30. And there's if EB-5 can't be renewed through some other congressional mechanism before then we would think that somebody might be able to throw into the budget bill, as has always happened in the past, a little thing that says, and EB-5 is extended, along with all the other hundreds of things that expire on the same day that the budget does. So until Congress passes some kind of omnibus funding legislation that funds the government for another year, I would be very surprised to see USCIS say, oh, time's up, game over, denials and rejections.
Robert, I think a lot of people have a misconception, and even some very experienced immigration lawyers, they just assumed, and I don't know where they got the sense, that even though if Congress couldn't agree, even if in the Senate they couldn't agree on a bill, they would just kick the can down the road. And some very experienced immigration lawyers were saying this will get kicked down the road. And I think that was a big misconception, because knowing kind of the negotiations between Grassley and Leahy, they had stripped this bill from the continuing resolution as part of the budget. It's in its own standalone bill. That way, if it didn't, if the bill wasn't negotiated, the program would expire. And then the other misconception I think a lot of immigration lawyers have, and they've been kind of passing this message on to investors, is that, even in the past when the program had lapsed because the budget hadn't been approved, or the government shut down for 8 days, the USCIS was still taking these applications and processing them. But maybe if you don't mind just talking about the difference between a program sunset, which we're facing on Wednesday, to the short-term, the 21 short-term reauthorizations that we've had, and even when the government shut down, they were still processing. What is kind of the difference between that, and then talk about strategically why they kind of took it out of the continuing resolution?
Okay, one thing I didn't say or address is whether USCIS is likely to continue to accept new I-526 petitions and maybe adjustment of status applications now, after Wednesday, for regional center-based investments. They could do that. They have done that in the past. When we were waiting on the resolution of a budget bill, they kept accepting those, saying we may have to end up denying these, but for now we're going to reject them. Accept them. This time, I don't know if they'll do that or not, and it's possible that they'll see this difference that you're trying to get at. and that is that we're not just waiting on the next funding of the government that the EB-5 program was on the same cycle as. Every other time till now, as you just said, the expiration date of the EB-5 program was the same as the expiration date of the E-Verify program, the religious worker visa program, and all of the rest of the federal budget, or most of the rest of the federal budget. And so it was presumed and believed with reason from past experience that EB-5 would get renewed to the same extent that all these other things did when an agreement on the budget came in place. Most of the times when there was an expiration, there was a shutdown of the entire federal government, and there was a belief that the government would end up being unshut and the funding would take place and the EB-5 extension would be part of it, and there was no reason to think otherwise. This time, as you said, I think it was Senators Leahy and Grassley who were able to engineer getting the expiration date of EB-5 in the last budget renewal or extension to September 30, and get the EB-5 expiration extended only to June 30. So blame them maybe for that, because they were trying to force a showdown to get somebody to face EB-5 and put in their law. And part of that is because it's just really hard to get a 100-page plus bill included in a budget reconciliation. Nobody wants big, complicated things any more than there already are in a budget reconciliation bill. And so if you can just say EB-5 extended to the next date, that's all there is, great. If you want to put in 112 pages of complicated stuff about integrity measures, that's not on the table for those big deals. So they've kind of forced a situation. So blame them for that, but then blame the other guys for playing chicken. I mean, this is basically the game of imagine these two cars, teenagers with cars and driving toward each other on a two-lane road in the middle of the night, going right at each other and see who flinches before they run into each other and crash. And it's sort of similar to that. And, I'll have to hand it to the EB-5IC contingent. They didn't flinch, and they stood their ground even at the risk of crashing everybody into the expiration. So they showed they're serious. And as far as how this is different, I think the other thing that's different about this, besides it being off the cycle of the budget, is that this time a simple extension would preserve the 900,000 to 1.8 million discrepancy that those guys in the big money centers hate, right? So it's always easier to get a little something done and just renew with no change. And that's what they've always been able to get done over Grassley's just really angry objection, right? They've been able to get that done. This time, they didn't want to just have a little extension. They want change. So everybody wants some different kind of change, and they're going to have to get together and decide, what everybody can live with. And I think, the thing that's really a big deal is that the people in the middle of this are the people who already invested, who stand to get royally screwed if there is not a renewal in some way, so that they get covered. And I think ultimately everybody on both sides recognizes that and is going to see to it. And I have an attitude about that very issue, and I'll go on about it if you want me to, but I'll save that for a question.
Sure. Just 1 second. I know Preeya wants to ask you about the federal lawsuit and the federal judge that ruled against But I'll let her ask that.
Not an issue.
But I know, I mean, just talking to the folks at IIUSA and the folks at IC and everyone in the industry, I mean, I think we all want the exact same things. I don't think there's, get it, some folks, one part of the program benefits them and another, another group, everyone has different parts of the program that are important to them. But at the end of the day, I think we all want the same thing. We want EB-5 to be permanent, reauthorized. We want the regional center program to be permanent, reauthorized. We all want additional visas. We want the program to be easier so, investors from other countries don't have to go through this 10 or 15-year wait, and they can actually get a green card and immigrate here and bring foreign direct investment and also pay U.S. taxes. We all want that. I think the only difference is that, I think the folks at IIUSA realize that we're not members of Congress. The members of the Senate have what they want. There's only so much, we can influence and get them to kind of vote along with what the industry wants. And then, I think the folks at IC are just, holding their ground and saying, hey, unless we get the additional visas, unless we get some of these other items, we don't want to bill because, maybe after you reauthorize that, you'll forget about us and then you're not going to help change some of those other things. So I think we're all saying the same thing, but I do agree with you. I think, playing chicken with people's lives and in the program, there's 50,000 investors that are currently in the pipeline that some shape or form that this is going to affect. And as Preeya and I know, they're all calling us. Everyone's no one really knows what's happening. No one really knows what the ramifications of this is. And it's not just the economic development program. This is people's life. These are people that are immigrating here to the U.S. Preeya and I are both have immigrant families, so we totally understand that. It just makes it very, very complicated.
Well, look, here just me railing for a second, and that is the first thing that needs to happen is somebody needs to pass a law that says that anybody who files an I-526, who invests the money and files an I-526, while a law is in place that makes that eligible, should be absolutely grandfathered from any expiration of anything. Right? That's the first thing that needs to happen. And shame on everybody for talking about any bill this last round that didn't include that. Okay?
Amen to that. And I support you on that. And I think that's something I think we all need to point out. So, Preeya, sorry I monopolized all the questions, but yeah, I know you have some questions.
No, it's really interesting because that's obviously another question that I've been getting from all my investors that have already invested over the past 2 years who are still waiting, and they're just really, really nervous and really scared as to what's going to happen. And it would be really sad if that situation were to come into play because these are people who have made plans for their migration, they've made plans for their children's schooling. They saved up this money, invested this money, and they're frankly very excited to be getting these green cards, and then to be told that all of a sudden, the program's no more, you're not going to be able to do that, would actually be really heartbreaking, I think.
Yeah, and look,
especially from a perspective.
Let's be clear, though. Nobody in the game here really thinks that there will be no legislation that ends up protecting them. Everybody believes that will happen, and I do too. But those people you're talking about just shouldn't have to live with that kind of worry. And it also is terrible to try to raise money into the United States, telling somebody in a PPM that you need to tell them, look, you've got to live through all the extensions of this regional center program that it takes to get to the point that you actually get a visa, get an I-526 approval, and get a visa number and get in here. You've got to get, that law has to be extended however many times it takes to get to that point for you, or you could be screwed. That is unreasonable to ask somebody. And if you're in the business of making laws that are designed to attract people to come here, you need to change that in the next law.
And Robert, I think one of the important things that you mentioned is that people need to have faith in the United States government. They need to have faith that they're investing a significant amount of money. I mean, a lot of these people, they're not millionaires. They're selling their homes. They're getting loans. They're putting money together for their family to get this immigration, to bring their kids and provide for an American dream for their kids. And for us to go out there and raise money and tell them that, hey, there's all these uncertainties and the government can't get their act together. It's not right. And separately, I think, when this program started back in the early 1990s, there's only 2 or 3 other countries that there's a similar program, investment migration. And now I think there are over 40 countries that have a similar program. And right now, in the last 2 years, we are losing so many investors to these various other programs. And I think, people need to come back and have faith in the U.S. program. If there's anyone, from the USCIS or Senate or anyone from the government watching, we just can't have investors to, invest their money and, come to these countries. We know how many businesses and jobs immigrants have created for this country. They've a lot of businesses, a lot of tech companies have been created by immigrants or people that whose parents immigrated here. So these are the people that we want here, and for them to lose faith in the U.S. government that somehow their investment that they made 2 years ago now is in jeopardy because somebody's playing politics with that. I think that's got to change. That whole mindset needs to change, and we just need to be more friendly and understanding to these foreign investors, and knowing that this is a zero-sum game. We're losing foreign direct investment to many countries in Europe right now that have similar programs that are much easier to navigate.
Yeah,
Well
I
said.
think I think I think let's spend a few minutes as well focusing on this other important topic that has come up this week, which has been the litigation and the summary judgment, which effectively has brought the price of EB5 back to 500,000 for a very limited time. So I think there's been a lot of rush surrounding that, and maybe we could gain a little bit more clarity as to what that actually means. So if you could just maybe, Robert, tell us a little bit, just a brief summary of what has happened with this litigation firstly, and then we could move into questions about that.
Okay, so I already did talk about the regulation of 2019 that increased the minimum amount to 900,000 and the normal amount to 1.8 million, and that narrowed how the targeted employment area or the high unemployment part of targeted employment areas is determined so that there are less places where the lower amount can be invested to qualify. So that regulation was finalized in 2019, but when it was finalized, the guy who signed it was a kind of an acting Homeland Security Secretary appointed by President Trump, not Senate confirmed, under the normal process. And there's a law called the Federal Vacancies Reform Act that was designed to basically prevent the president from getting around the requirement of getting Senate confirmation of the people he appoints and just having everybody be enacting everything forever. And it's just some technicalities not worth us going into, but for whatever reason, this judge and several other judges in similar litigation about other types of regulations and things have ruled that that guy was not properly appointed under the Federal Vacancies Reform Act. So whatever he did doesn't legally count. And so that regulation just didn't happen. It just didn't legally, it's a nullity. And all that happened was back in 2017 that regulation was proposed. So what we have then is we're back to the state of what were the regulations before that 2019 regulation supposedly took effect. And that means that that means that the minimum investment is 500,000, and if it's not in a targeted employment area, the investment is 1 million. And very importantly, a targeted employment area that's not a county-wide or MSA-wide targeted employment area has to be shown by a letter from a state officer that's authorized by the governor to do that. And you can't just show what the data is, at least by my reading. You can't just show what the data is that we've been doing under the new regulations. And so what we've got then is, for a few days here, it appears that people have the ability to file I-526 petitions based on $500,000 investments if they can get it in the door before that judge is persuaded to issue some kind of stay of the order, or until Congress can enact something that changes the amounts. And so right this minute, there are a bunch of people who are crazily going around making deals, to make investments and getting that in the door with USCIS today and maybe tomorrow. But here's a very weird technicality is that all the states that had people who used to figure out and issue those targeted employment area letters, high unemployment area letters, those people haven't been doing that for the last year and a half or two, and they're not in place, or everybody who wants to make this happen is needing to scramble around basically Friday and today, trying to find somebody in a state agency that can issue one of these letters. Otherwise, they're having to warn their investors in the PPM supplement that they're giving them that, hey, this might not qualify. Your $500,000, even if everything else works out right, the lack of a state letter could be found by USCIS to be something that makes that petition have to be denied. That's awkward because you're supposed to include in the petition all the documents about the investment, including the PPM and the supplement. And so that document that you're submitting is actually giving a roadmap to the U.S. adjudicator to deny your case. But I mean, trust me, they know about this issue, and they'll either decide to impose the rule as it is, or they might be more flexible. We'll have to see. There are going to be a bunch of petitions that go in without a state letter and just with some economist's letter saying this is the data, and it would be qualifying under the rules, of gerrymandering a high unemployment area. But that's going on as far as regional center investments. They have to be filed need to be in the FedEx envelope in the U.S. tomorrow, I think, to arrive Wednesday. There's a little bit of uncertainty about whether arriving Wednesday is sufficient. I think it is sufficient, but I know some people are saying it needs to go in the mail today to arrive tomorrow to make sure it gets there before the date that says that the law says it expires. We've done a lot of these documents for people who are making these offerings and tweaking them and making them possible. I'm not representing a bunch of investors trying to do this because I'm just not interested in the frantic pressure and liability that's associated with it. But anyway, that's what's going on. After that, after Wednesday, remember the direct EB-5 program lives on, and now anybody who's offering a direct investment could be able to file with a $500,000 investment and a TEA letter, or evidence to show the whole county or MSA is a high unemployment area, or that it's a rural area, and they could qualify. Now, we keep thinking that any minute Homeland Security is going to file a notice of appeal of this decision in California that invalidated the regulations, and to make a motion to the court for a stay, proving why this stay is needed. The judge in the order issued last week said in a one-sentence statement, I'm not ruling on the government's reference in a one-sentence kind of offhand comment that there should be a stay. I'm not treating that as a motion for stay, basically, and inviting the government to make a motion for a stay of the order so that it wouldn't take effect, so that the new regulations would still be in effect technically, and that would allow USCIS to reject applications that are made at the $500,000 level. And there's just a whole lot of uncertainty about that. If that stay comes, if the appeal is made and that stay is issued, it's not clear what will happen as to the $500,000 filings that will have come in the meantime. It's possible that USCIS could reject them all, right? Very possible.
To kind of understand, for our audience to understand, the executive agency, they can change the rules and, the different parameters of the program. but only Congress can extend the program. And as the program expires on Wednesday, the agency, either expires as a $500,000 program or $900,000 program. The agency has no power to extend it. Congress has to do it, and the Senate's not in session, so they have to come back in session and figure something out. But I have a technical question for you. I mean, Alejandro Mayorkas, who is now the acting Secretary of Department of Homeland Security, who used to be the acting head of the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service.
He wasn't acting. He was the head of the
yeah, he was the person, the same agency that you were director of, and
I was acting director.
You were acting director of, but he had actually reiterated that even though the Trump administration had passed these regulations, that his administration, even though he was appointed by President Biden, they were ready, willing, and able to re-up these rules. And my question is, under the Administrative Procedure Act, would that if they re-up the rules, would it have to go back to comment and notice period? Go through the 90-day notice and comment period, and this takes 6 months to be re-upped, or could they technically re-up the rules immediately if Congress were to re-extend the program?
As I recall, off the top of my head, in January 2017, in the last month and really the last few days of the Obama administration, USCIS issued the proposed regulation that became the final regulation, and that proposal invited the comments that are required. It made the required invitation for the public to give comments. I think that regulation probably was signed by then USCIS Director Leon Rodriguez, if not the Homeland Security Secretary. And those should be fully valid. And I'm not sure why the current Secretary of Homeland Security, Mayorkas, couldn't issue a final regulation that incorporates all of the discussion about the comments that the 2019 final regulation stated. In a way, that's what he already did when he recently signed a ratification in which he said, "I hereby, as the Senate confirmed Secretary of Homeland Security, ratify everything that happened and everything that's been said in the final regulation as if I am issuing them again." And why shouldn't that be sufficient? Because why should we say, well, in order for this to happen, you have to, burn down some more trees and publish, 500 more pages in the Federal Register. Of course, we don't print them so much anymore. It's all electronic. But why is it? And I think probably the best argument on appeal would be that ratification is just as good as issuing the final regulation again. And why make that happen? But I don't quite understand why it wouldn't be sufficient to just publish basically the same regulation again with the same comments about, or reactions to the comments, and signed by Mayorkas. And maybe that's what they'll do. I don't know. It could happen any second. But apparently there are people who believe, and I've heard, I haven't talked to her, I've heard that the lawyer, one of the lawyers in the firm that represents the plaintiff bearing in that litigation believes that it's not that simple and DHS would have to do more steps. I don't know the answer to that, and we'll just have to see how that plays out in litigation if it happens. But it's very interesting.
I'm going to ask you to speculate a little bit, so I know you're not going to feel comfortable doing this, but how much of that, we hear about Bering Regional Center and that lawsuit. They're not one of the major players in EB-5. There are many, many major players that have been involved on both sides of the, kind of the discussions the last 7 years on reauthorization. How much of that do you think was actual damages that Bering had to bring on this lawsuit? How much of that do you think was forum shopping, thinking that this judge in Northern District of California would give them the outcome that they wanted, and they picked that forum, and hence the plaintiff that they picked to get that outcome?
Well, forum shopping is as old as courts in multiple places, And I see this litigation as an effort by a whole section of the industry seeking to invalidate these regulations. And this happens to be a representative of that industry who, for whatever reasons, was both willing and kind of conveniently situated to be able to bring the lawsuit in a forum where they thought it was the most likely to be successful.
Do you think that the effects of what has happened this past week with the litigation, do you think that's going to have any kind of bearing on the negotiations for reauthorization? Or any kind of
I do. I just think that all contributes, that and the recent showing that the Money Center folks are willing to, keep driving right at the other car to get what they want. All of that, I think, contributes toward the likelihood that what's going to end up happening is a new grand bargain of some type that reopens how much is invested and so forth. So, except for this moment where people are rushing to file $500,000 investments, if that had not happened, or like if the expiration of the law had occurred before the case decision was issued, then I think you would have just seen an almost complete shutdown of EB-5 investment until the dust can settle on what is the minimum amount of investment. And I think one of the reasons that there's been so little EB-5 investment since those regulations took effect is not that just that 900,000 is so much and so inconceivably large an amount that anybody could muster to invest. I think there are lots of people out there who could pull together $900,000 and invest, but they're holding back because they think that either through some legislative change or litigation that there's going to be a change and an opportunity to invest less would be available. And here suddenly it seems to maybe have happened. And so until we kind of have a sense of a stable situation of how much has to be invested, I think there's going to be a relative tendency to hold back, other than this this sudden rush of people who are desperate to slip in at 500.
One thing that's interesting is, in 1990 when they passed this program, they always intended that this was going to be $1 million program. And in the recent Senate legislation, they've always said 500,000 was too low, that the minimum needs to be $1 million. And in 1993 when they did the pilot program, they also envisioned that majority of the investments would be at $1 million and only a subset of them would be at the 500,000. Hence, they said that you would have to have at least 30% from these TEAs or rural areas, and they didn't envision that 99 or 100% of the program would be at the $500,000 level. So there's a little bit of I think Congress has always intended to be a $1 million program, and 500,000 is too cheap to get a U.S. residency. But then the other side of the coin is when we had the $500,000 investment, we actually had a lot of middle class investors that were putting up their home or getting loans against their property and investing. And then when the price went up to 900,000, it really made it much harder for middle class people from other countries to invest, and it made it more of a millionaire program, which is exactly what we wanted to stay away from. We wanted it to be something that was affordable. So there's definitely both sides of the coin, but it's incredible. I mean, when the program was 500,000, we're getting in something like $10 billion annually, and then it screeched to a halt when the first quarter of the fiscal year 2020. I think there was only 8 investors. It just basically the program just died. But you're right. It is a major part of that wasn't necessarily the ticket, but so much the timing and how long it took to get a green card. Also, people's perception that this may not be permanent, and there will be some kind of grand bargain. The price would come down.
Well, also that everybody who was thinking about it went ahead and did it before November 2019, before when the amount was 500,000. I mean, if you publish a doubling of a price of anything as a monopolistic seller, you can expect that everybody who's thinking about buying what you're selling is going to suddenly buy it before the price increase, right?
Right.
But I would also say that I have concerns about, really encouraging and facilitating investment by a bunch of people who barely have enough money to scrape together the $500,000 investment. I mean, these are risky investments. I mean, they're inherently required to be at risk, and I think there's a lot about our securities laws that are designed to discourage the sale of investments like this to people who can barely afford it and who really can't afford to lose all of it. So, I kind of think it should be $1 million program by people who have $1 million to spare. The rules don't necessarily require exactly that. And I understand that people can make their own choices within the rules and technicalities. And we certainly facilitate that where we can and the parties wish to do it. But, as a public policy, I don't think it's necessarily a great idea to have this program be significantly subscribed by people who can barely scrape the money together to make the investment.
Preeya, any final questions? I know Robert's got to run, but maybe a couple final thoughts on what's going to happen to the EB-5 program and what are some of the things investors should be thinking about?
That's you're now asking me that.
Yeah, sorry, Robert, go ahead.
Yeah. I think that within the next several months, the EB-5 program for regional centers will be renewed, probably with some revision to one or both of the amounts involved, although probably not a big difference from the $900,000 that currently has been required under the 2019 regulations. There probably will be some integrity measures that are imposed. Those don't really affect investors in the near term. They probably help investors by ensuring that there's better tracking and administration of the money they invest. I don't know, what constitutes a targeted employment area might or might not be changed. I think there's a decent chance it will not be changed, but who knows? I don't think there will be an increase in the number of EB-5 investors who are allowed to get green cards, because that's an issue that just opens up that same concern among every immigration program. And I think once we have this legislation in place, there will be a new wave of sense of stability and significant participation going forward that we didn't have before. And I think it'll be, it'll be back to a pretty interesting program. And I think once we come out of that, I think there may be better chances for long-term authorization and even more numbers over time, as soon as people can realize the positive economic effect that can be achieved through this thing.
There's been, north of $40 billion in EB-5 investments that have come in. Lots of new taxpayers, lots of new immigrants that are creating businesses and bringing, dollars to generate economic activity. And, I think, we as an industry, there's definitely a lot of disagreements on how do we get there. But I think one thing we all agree is that we need more immigrants in the country. And I think that this is a great program that doesn't cost the taxpayers anything, and it adds, a well-needed foreign direct investment, especially at a time right now when we were post-pandemic rebuilding. And, unemployment rate was at 3.5% before the pandemic, crept up all the way to 9.5%, 10%. And even now we're at 6.5%. And what better way to build back the economy post-pandemic than, bring the foreign direct investment and not lose those dollars to other competing programs in Europe and elsewhere.
I agree. Yeah.
Well said.
Well, Robert, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us. I think the recording time of this is very timely, as we're looking at 2 days before the program, the EB-5 program, sunsets, and we're hoping we can get this program out to our listeners so that so you can answer a lot of their questions in one scoop instead of you having to jump on the phone and answering these questions individually.
Okay, Abteen, thanks a lot.
So
Preeya, good to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for letting me participate.
Have a great day.
Thank you so much, Robert.
Thank you for joining the Investment Migration Report. And as always, we hope we were able to answer all of your questions this week.